Swissair's UN shuttle, New York to Geneva, a regular commute for diplomats and dignitaries. September 2nd, 1998, high above the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia.
Swissair 111 heavy is declaring stand after smoke in the boxes.
An aviation code for peril, soon to be a tragedy. It would be called an accident. Tonight, the whistleblower who suspected murder. An hour and 13 minutes after takeoff, Swissair Flight 111 plunged into the sea near Halifax. There were 229 people on board. From the early moments of the search, it was clear that none survived.
Basically what happened was the plane, when it hit the nose of the aircraft, it would have hit first and would have crushed against the water. Now, at the speeds involved, we're looking at the tail meeting the nose in about a quarter of a second.
The search for life would soon become a search for understanding. What could have caused such sudden devastation, so much death? Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. Those images would be embedded in memories around the world for years to come. 229 people, after unimaginable minutes of terror, dead in a fraction of a second. But in the aftermath of that horrifying plane crash, there were other casualties, and tonight you'll meet one of them. A dedicated cop for whom that night marked the beginning of the end of a long career in law enforcement. And he will tell us for the first time publicly that the final and until now unacknowledged casualty of Swissair 111 may well have been the truth of what really happened.
Sergeant T.C. Juby, Sergeant Juby, T.C. Juby, Sergeant T.C. Juby.
His name, Tom Juby. After years of public silence, he'll reveal the details of a tense backroom struggle to control the scope of the investigation of that plane crash. Details documented in thousands of digitally stored emails, videos, and photographs.
It's a homicide investigation of 229 people. All of the material was there to make you suspect that there was something. What it was, we didn't get to that point.
Tom Juby was a Mountie, a corporal soon to be a sergeant, a crime scene specialist with more than 25 years' experience in 5 provinces and 2 territories. He'd investigated hundreds of fires, over 1,000 suspicious deaths, more than a dozen plane crashes. But this investigation would present unprecedented challenges right from the beginning.
It would be as much as a week before we would know that there were only the one full body. Everything else would be bits and pieces. Most body parts were maximum of 20 pounds.
This would be his base of operations for more than 3 years, the Shearwater Naval Air Station near Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. His first assignment here would be to help identify the fragments of what had once been living human beings. A warning, graphic images from that project are disturbing.
We're looking at the mortuary area here, and there are 2 stations in operation today. Tom will just keep the camera in here without going in.
He would work closely for more than a month with Dr. John Butt, one of Canada's top forensic pathologists.
Can each of you just stay where you are? Because we got a video, but put a cloth over that thing that's on the table.
I think the 2nd of September was a Wednesday night. And it became apparent to me by the Friday that there were very few large pieces of human remains. In fact, that day was the day when the only intact body arrived.
They spent weeks identifying body parts, including more than 1,000 severed fingers recovered from the wreckage in the sea.
One of the body bags that they dropped off, they took, I think it was 80 samples out of it, identified something like 29 people from the DNA that was in that bag, and the bag had less than 80 pounds of human remains.
So every day at around the same time you'd hear this distinctive chopper sound.
They were coming in constantly. Every one of us had a moment of reckoning. And with some, it took longer than others. I saw guys break down. And then, you know, I came to a point once where I had to go for a long, long walk. And it was tough. I couldn't get the helicopters out of my head.
In the days and weeks following the crash, the sea gave up the fragments of lives interrupted in a moment of devastating violence. A career terminated. A holiday ended before it had begun. A life barely started, suddenly over. For families and friends of victims, there was the incomprehensible grief of a loss that is sudden and complete.
My opening to the families on the night of the 4th of September at the Lord Nelson Hotel in Halifax, it shook me to the core.
The faces of the people in the audience was one of agony. It wasn't issues of tearfulness and crying and wailing. It was,
none of you will ever see your loved one again.
At the controls that night, a father of 3 just about to turn 50. Captain Urs Zimmermann, Swissair's senior pilot, the star of this company promotional video. His wife Priska, interviewed in 1999.
Suddenly in the morning, around 6 o'clock, my daughter came, Andrea, and she said, "Mama, Papa had an accident with his flight." And I woke up and I thought, no, it's not possible. There's more than one flight a day from New York to Zurich. And she said, no, I was looking on his schedule. I watched TV, CNN, and I saw the reporter. And then I knew it's true. And my life is not the same anymore.
In mid-November, the Mountie, Tom Juby, became part of the effort to recover and identify more than 2 million pieces of the shattered airplane, now scattered in 200 feet of water. By instinct and by training, he would treat this as a potential crime scene. There were only 4 Canadians on board the plane, but because it crashed in Nova Scotia, determining the cause would fall to the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, an independent agency created by Parliament to find the cause of accidents like this one. The emphasis on accident is deliberate. The TSB makes it clear its job is safety. Criminal activity would fall to someone else, presumably the RCMP, and to a crime scene specialist like Tom Juby.
For each of these individuals, we also have details, for instance, date of birth, age, height, weight.
My function for 27 years was to attend any type of crime scene, to find any type of physical evidence, as well as to photograph it and video it, and to interpret the scene.
Engine alert display, you have these alerts.
Swissair 111 heavy is declaring stand after smoke in the cockpit.
Smoke in the cockpit. This later simulation using Captain Zimmerman's actual assessment confirmed the crisis on the plane.
Do we see the emergency checklist for air conditioning smoke?
A fire on board.
Swissair 111, when you have time, could I have the number of souls on board and your fuel on board, please, for emergency services?
No one claimed responsibility. There was no evidence of an explosion. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 and the new age of security were still 3 years away. It seemed to make a lot of sense when senior officials of the Transportation Safety Board began to treat the crash as an accident. Early on, Tom Juby got the word from a superior.
He came to me one day, about day 10 of the accident, and said, "We don't have to worry about this going criminal because the TSB have heard the tape and determined that it's an accident."
For the Mounties, and especially Tom Juby, it was much too soon to exclude the possibility that what caused the plane crash might have been a crime. And as the months went by, the search for answers would lead him to ever more perplexing questions and deepening suspicion. When we come back, mysteries within a mystery.
It is a big difference if you have an accident or if somebody is murdering you.
Between 12 and 5,000 feet, we are declaring emergency now.
It was a regular shuttle for United Nations people traveling between headquarters in New York and UN agencies in Switzerland.
What do you have for last position on when you lost?
Down just around St. Margaret's Bay.
Okay. Got any idea of souls on board that thing?
The passengers included a former head of the World Health Organization's AIDS program, a Saudi prince, an in-law of the late Shah of Iran. Urs Zimmerman, Swissair's senior pilot, was no stranger to the shuttle. For the families of crew and passengers on board Swissair 111, the grief was permanent. But knowing what exactly caused this tragedy might offer them some comfort. Priska Zimmerman.
My husband is dead. Passengers are dead, they don't come back, so in the end, for me it's the end. I don't have any questions, I just want to hear answers to what they suppose what went wrong.
Something that a person can identify as being theirs. I mean, if it's a T-shirt, we don't bother.
The RCMP investigator Tom Juby was on the lookout for any evidence of crime, beginning with a motive. Maybe something about a passenger, or something in the cargo, which included nearly $500 million worth of diamonds, gold, and cash, and a painting by Picasso.
One of the main routes of investigation of a plane crash is to know, of anything, is to know who's on the plane and what cargo's on the plane. And by who, not just a name and date of birth and a home address. What's his job? Who's he work for? What was he doing on the plane? Where was he going? Is he a target?
He'd been told by an RCMP superior 10 days into the investigation that the word from on high was that the crash had been an accident. The safety board would run the show. There would be no need to worry about court-admissible evidence.
We never verified, as far as I understand, what actually was on that plane. The manifest says that it was a box of whatever, but nobody went back to the company to see if that's a legitimate company. Does that address exist? Is that actually a legitimate shipment? Now, we don't know.
But Juby was a cop, and for the next 3 years he'd keep thinking like a cop as he got to know the doomed airplane, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11, intimately. Everyone agreed that the crisis on Swissair 111 started with a fire, and that the fire had started in the forward section of the plane. Juby worked with hundreds of technicians reconstructing that part of the plane from the bits and pieces recovered from the ocean floor.
Every one of them would look at the mock-up and just, geez, awful lot of burning for the amount of material that was there. And we kept finding extensive amounts of molten aluminum.
Atlantic City, Sergeant T.C. Juby.
Experiments like this one in the United States were designed by the Federal Aviation Authority to test the safety board's hypothesis that insulation fueled the fire on Swissair 111, and that the fire could have been sparked by arcing in a wire, a short circuit.
Now, hey, Brian. Now.
But the tests would raise doubts in Sergeant Juby's mind that sparking on insulation that was supposedly fire-resistant could have triggered the inferno that helped to crash the plane. For the TSB, the tests were inconclusive. But Juby's police notes, after he had watched and videoed the tests, were blunt. Numerous attempts were made at several locations, but by 14:59 hours, they had all failed, and the test was shut down. Subsequent tests in a government lab in Ottawa to analyze the chemistry of molten metal from the suspect wiring would raise new doubts about the safety board theory that sparks from a short circuit caused the fire on Swissair 111. Those tests would raise another and more sinister possibility that the fire was set on purpose.
There was a lot of magnesium, more than I would have expected.
A year into the investigation, a senior research scientist with the federal government, Dr. Jim Brown, would advise the TSB that melted copper wires from Swissair 111 contained elements that shouldn't have been there, notably high readings of magnesium.
When Brown discussed this with me, he asked me, "Do you have any idea what that indicates?" And yeah, a little bit, but you tell me. And he said, well, it indicates the possibility of an incendiary device.
Sergeant Juby had investigated hundreds of arson cases. The magnesium set off alarm bells. September 22nd, 1999, Juby wrote a memo to his bosses. The note was cautious, pointing out that Brown had not yet completed all his tests, that they might ultimately explain the unusual occurrence of magnesium. However, he went on to say, should they not be able to do so, then we must be prepared to work with the results and seriously consider the fact that an incendiary device of some kind may have been present. Incendiary device. In other words, a chemical cocktail planted on the plane and timed to start a deadly fire. But the TSB mandate was to only investigate accidents. They were over a year into a project that was high profile, globally significant, and had already spent tens of millions on it. The suggestion that the accident was criminal could blow the TSB right off the Swissair file.
They didn't have a clue what the cause of the fire was, but it could not be criminal because they don't do criminal.
Juby told Brown that his findings were politically sensitive.
He wanted to be the first one to know if I was being approached or being in any way pressured by anyone.
Brown's tests continued, but he would find no explanation for the levels of magnesium in the beads of molten wiring. And as Juby had predicted, the Transportation Safety Board became increasingly impatient.
You mentioned in an email to the RCMP officer, Juby, in February 2001, that every time you mentioned magnesium, you got hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was a pyroclastic, or
that the report was heavily criticized.
Yeah, but I thought the RCMP would take that very seriously. I really did. Yeah.
So you were kind of reassured by the presence of the RCMP officers who were sort of thinking the way you were thinking.
That's right.
He was putting in a report to the TSB, and he had put in his findings of this potential incendiary device, and he was told to keep it out. And I had that email, and I said, you know, we've got a problem.
Brown's problem soon became Tom Juby's problem too. He was reprimanded for warning Dr. Brown about possible fallout from the safety board over his findings. He was told his hunt for evidence of crime was bordering on recklessness.
Now, I'm the physical evidence investigator for the file. I'm the guy that knows what's going on. And yet, you're taking that away from me?
It didn't end there, and he would eventually receive an order that would shake him to the roots of his policeman's soul. It had been one of the worst aviation disasters in Canadian jurisdiction. After 4 years of patient examination of 2 million bits of wreckage, and even now 13 years later, the precise cause of the plane crash remains a mystery. Victor Gurdon led the investigation for the Transportation Safety Board of Canada.
We determined that one of the arc sights on this wire was located above the cockpit ceiling, just in front of the rear cockpit wall on the right side of the cockpit. We believe that this is the area where the fire started.
And top TSB officials believed the fire likely started with a short circuit. But the TSB would always qualify its conclusions, never express certainty, except in one respect: it was an accident.
It is important to emphasize here that without the presence of this and other flammable material, this accident would not have happened.
For Priska Zimmerman, answers were and still are crucially important. And when the TSB ruled out crime, and for her more significantly, human error, it came as a relief.
I believed in everything they told me. For me it was okay. I had answers about my question, and the most important question is that my husband was innocent, that he couldn't do anything, whatever will be the reason why this airplane crashed.
The reason for the plane crash would preoccupy Sergeant Tom Juby of the RCMP for years, and he'd grow more dubious about the TSB's accidental crash conclusion. There was too much fire damage from too much heat, and there was all that magnesium. It all called for a full-scale criminal investigation, and at least one TSB investigator privately agreed with him. In his notes, Juby wrote that he was concerned, quote, that the RCMP needed to keep an eye open for a possible criminal cause, and that his TSB informant seemed to be of the same mind. By the way he spoke, I felt that he was not convinced that the cause of the fire was electrical. Just over a year after the crash, Juby informed his RCMP superiors that there was disturbing evidence that might suggest that the fire that brought the airplane down was caused by an incendiary device, something like a firebomb. At a meeting about a month later, he and another RCMP investigator laid out specific reasons to justify a criminal investigation. According to Juby's exhaustive notes from that meeting, they were explicitly discouraged from pursuing evidence of sabotage. Juby's police notes reflect a growing sense of frustration among his superiors with his determination to treat the crash as a potential criminal file. He was told it would be reckless and folly to change the path of the investigation at this time. Despite that clear warning, he would go on to write in his investigative notes, "I now have strong suspicion that an incendiary device was the cause of the fire on Swissair Flight 111.
And you were essentially looking into the DNA of a little bead of molten metal.
Right.
And you were finding some weird stuff in there.
That's right. And I wasn't getting any support from my own people either. I was being pulled into meetings, and between me and my two supervisors, and being severely reprimanded for having the opinion that this was a criminal investigation.
Why? Why would an organization like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police uphold the right? Why would they take a position like this?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It had to have come down from very high up.
Even now, 13 years after the plane crash, nobody very high up in the RCMP or any other public agency will comment publicly. But the refusal to ramp up the investigation to include the possibility of sabotage may have been based on nothing more mysterious than money.
It was a year and a half into the crash. We're shutting down. We've spent enough money.
The investigation would in fact continue for nearly 2 more years, but concerns about finances were explicit from early on.
And of course, from the RCMP side, there's no money. There was absolutely no money for anything. I couldn't go on tests unless the TSB paid for it. TSB wouldn't decide if I was going until the very last minute, and in most of the tests, we don't need you.
So the RCMP wouldn't spend any of its own money, basically.
That's right.
Which meant that if the TSB didn't want you to do it...
I didn't go.
The government scientist, Dr. Brown, who had discovered the unusual traces of magnesium in places up to 10 times what he'd have considered normal, was feeling a different kind of pressure.
So something changed?
Something changed, yeah. And I had no idea what it was, honestly, other than the fact that they had distanced themselves, or they decided that the work was not of merit. And some of my contacts in the forensics RCMP labs here in Ottawa used to come over quite a bit. All of a sudden, I wasn't getting those visits during some of this work.
Juby kept recording meticulous notes, facts and observations based on countless meetings, 3 years of patient police work, during which he took over 100,000 photographs, recorded hundreds of hours of video, studied minute details of more than a dozen Swissair MD-11 airplanes. His notes include opinions. The most contentious would turn out to be about that mysterious magnesium, and how officials, including his own bosses, reacted to it, deferring to the TSB's determination that the crash had been an accident.
How often does the RCMP get into a position where they are subordinating their legal responsibilities to investigate crime to some contractual relationship involving non-police agencies?
That's unprecedented. A policeman is a policeman. And if he sees something illegal, he damn well acts on it.
To say the least, Juby's notes were politically explosive. They were on many files, available to many senior people, including top officials of the TSB. There was always the danger that those notes would one day be made public, perhaps in court, or as they are now, in the court of public opinion. Juby had to be reined in. In February of 2001, he was summoned to his supervisor's office. There were 4 senior people there, and he was presented with an ultimatum. Denounce his notes in writing, then revise them. This is what they ordered him to sign. I, Sergeant T.C. Juby, have reviewed all notes submitted by myself for filing as they relate to Operation Homage. These notes reflect my personal theories and speculations. They are not founded in fact, nor is there any evidence to support them. Subsequently, by my own free will and volition without duress, I freely admit that my personal beliefs do not reflect the factual information found within the area of my responsibility.
He told me that what was in my notes was embarrassing to me and to the force. How could he possibly give those notes over to the TSB or to disclose them with the material that I have in them? You're taking the material out. If I don't, I am subject to suspension without pay. The originals will remain on file, but there will be a second set of notes, and those notes will be disclosed.
Tom Juby was astonished. To him, he was being ordered to commit a crime, obstructing justice. The memo was his proof.
That's the smoking gun. That is the Exhibit A. And I got to get it. And I sat there, how am I going to, I can't, you know, I'm not just going to reach over and grab it because I could have made this memo up. I need a signature on it. I need his signature.
Juby would agree to sign the memo, but only after he amended it in his own handwriting.
And I said, in other words, you want a second set of notes. That right? Yep. Okay, good. Signed it. Sign it. I want a copy of it. He signed it right there.
He never did change his notes or make a second set, but to him this document was proof of an illegal order. He would later complain to the office of the RCMP ethics advisor. It would take 2 years to get a verdict, but in the end the ruling was that his bosses had done nothing wrong. He disagrees.
And in your opinion, you were clearly being obstructed by your bosses.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it, and that's why I say I should have carried 4 handcuffs into the room, because there were 4 guys there tearing me apart over this file.
And in your opinion, obstructing justice?
Obstructing justice. And I ended up going to, I've gone to several lawyers over it. One of them is a Crown Counsel that I know, and they're all of the same opinion.
We asked Joel Pink, a leading Nova Scotia defense lawyer who's lectured on evidence and criminal practice at Dalhousie Law School and for the Halifax Police, for an opinion.
You've been around a while. I mean, how common is it for something like this?
Well, I've been doing this business now for 41 years. I've never seen it. And I've had very close relationships with the police, with the Crown, and I've never had a situation where someone has ordered a police officer to change their notes.
Or you have a police officer saying in the courtroom, well, they are my notes, but somebody made me change them around a bit. What would happen if that were the case?
Oh, I think that in a criminal matter, if a judge heard that, I would think that the judge would probably enter what we call a stay of proceedings, so a judicial stay of proceedings, and bring the whole thing to a halt.
So if there had been criminal proceedings, civil proceedings arising out of that investigation, and it turned out that Sergeant Juby had been pressured to change something, it would have been a devastating effect.
Absolutely, either from a criminal point of view or even from a civil point of view.
When we come back, was the crash an accident or murder?
I was the main guy. I'm supposed to know. I don't.
Tom Juby was a Mountie for nearly 30 years. Today he is revisiting the disaster that launched his last investigation, where Swissair Flight 111 crashed into the Atlantic off the coast of Nova Scotia.
We had reasonable grounds. We had the potential for an incendiary device with solid physical evidence.
After an exhaustive investigation, he and others had found tantalizing leads suggesting criminal involvement in the crash, but today, a startling admission from the former Mountie.
Today, I don't know whether there was an incendiary device on that plane or not. That should be a problem. I was the main guy. I'm supposed to know. I don't.
What's alarming about that frank admission is that given half a chance, he might have been able to resolve his suspicions one way or another. That the evidence of sabotage could be explained away objectively, or that the crash of Swissair 111 really might have been the result of a horrifying criminal conspiracy. 4.5 years after the crash, the Transportation Safety Board issued its final report, a nearly 350-page document that would be hailed as a model of thoroughness, a template for future crash investigations. More than 350 people were involved in preparing it at a cost of over $56 million. The report would only speculate about what caused the fire. Bad wiring, a short circuit, a flash fire that got out of control. But on one point, there was certainty. There was no evidence of criminality.
It's interesting when you do something as simple as a word check on the TSB report. The word magnesium does not appear anywhere in the report. Did you find that weird?
I didn't know that until just now. I have read the report and realized now that it didn't appear.
I'll tell you
Isn't
something.
that interesting?
I'll tell you something that does appear. 2 words: incendiary device.
I know it does.
And they appear 3 times, and each time they say the RCMP found no evidence of any incendiary or criminal device. Is it true that the RCMP found no evidence of a criminal or incendiary device?
Well, at the time I was part of the RCMP, I found it. So I guess the statement is wrong.
Dr. Brown would complain of errors in the final TSB report and that they'd unfairly discredited the scientific tests that discovered high levels of magnesium.
In 380 or some pages, they devote part of 1 page, we'll give them full marks here, 1 page to essentially discrediting that whole AES scientific exploration.
Yeah, I did challenge that. I did write back and indicated that I had found several problems with the report. A few factual things that were simple to change, a few that were obviously used to discredit the analysis of the whole package of work.
And the response was?
Other information that was available to the Transportation Safety Board of
You didn't have the whole picture?
I didn't have the whole picture.
And so you were wrong?
That's right.
Tom Juby wouldn't go so quietly, and when he was eventually forced into retirement, he took with him a trove of investigative information to make a WikiLeaks admirer proud.
Tape identification, Sergeant T.C. Juby, August 18, 99, Seattle, Boeing Lab.
A computer drive with 270 gigabytes of video alone, at least 100 hours. Thousands of internal emails, tens of thousands of photographs, and most informative of all is investigative field notes running nearly 1,400 pages. Juby spent long years seeking vindication inside the RCMP. He was rebuffed at every stage till he finally decided to put his case before the public that he'd served for more than 27 years. Tom Juby's version of events is corroborated by another RCMP investigator from the Swissair file, who, like Juby, is no longer a policeman. We've also had private conversations with senior officials of the TSB and the RCMP who were directly involved in the Swissair investigation. They considered Sergeant Juby to have been a dedicated, conscientious cop, but his policing skills and instincts were wasted on Swissair 111. It was just a tragic accident.
One of the criticisms that was leveled at both you and Brown, either implicitly or explicitly, was that all this nitpicking was reopening painful issues for the families of the victims of Swissair 111. Have you given any thought to what they're going to think when they hear how this thing was investigated?
I have given it a lot of thought, and I know that bringing it all, raking it over the coals again, is going to be very hard on the family members. But if I was a family member and knew what I know now, I certainly wouldn't be mad at me.
The Swissair pilot's widow, Priska Zimmerman, is philosophical.
I just miss my husband, and the reason why he died is there is no difference for me. They are dead, they don't come back again. But I think it's important for other airplane crashes that in the future, if something happened again, that they really search for the reason.
It's not a matter of if, but when does another plane go down? And what's that investigation going to be? How is that going to be handled?
September 4th, 2002, almost exactly 4 years after the Swissair crash, Tom Juby left the Mounties in a cloud of controversy. He augments a pension doing shift work as a computer technician. All the years he spent in law enforcement, now just a memory, overshadowed by the doubts he wasn't able to dispel, but might have had he been allowed to do his job.
I took an oath to uphold the law. What happened was wrong.
Perhaps it was an accident, but serious questions went unanswered. Could the plane have been a target because of all those influential passengers? And what of all those diamonds, supposedly $500 million worth? In all the material recovered, not a single gem was found.
Swissair 111 Heavy, declaring emergency between 12 and 5,000 feet. We are declaring emergency now.
It was 13 years ago, but the details of that terrible event still haunt him. A burden that is heavier because of disillusionment.
Before too long, another one's going to go down. Will that be just swept under the carpet as another safety thing, or will we actually look and see what the real cause of the crash is?
As far as I'm concerned, it's a blight on our history. If Canada can't follow through on 229 potential homicides, then what happens when there's only one?
Canada's Swissair investigation led to more than 20 safety recommendations that have been adopted around the world. Those mylar insulation blankets that fed the fire have been replaced in thousands of airplanes because of early findings by the TSB. You can find the whole TSB report on our website. However, RCMP and TSB officials refused repeated requests to talk publicly about Tom Juby's allegations. We agonized about reviving questions that bereaved families and friends had hoped had been forever laid to rest. In the end, we felt it was important to revisit this story because of a credible science-based claim that the Swissair 111 investigation was curtailed before it had properly assessed a criminal scenario that might explain that tragic crash. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And that's our program for this week. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. For everyone here at the Fifth Estate, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.